Okay, let's unpack this.
Today, we are diving deep into the definitive and, let's be honest, the explosive political philosophy of Niccolo Machiavelli.
And this is so much more than just a history lesson on 16th century Italy.
Oh, absolutely. Our mission here is to do a genuine deep dive into his foundational works. We're talking mainly the Prince and the Discourses, and to really extract the core nuggets.
The insights on politics, military strategy, even psychology.
Exactly. The things that cement his legacy as this enduring and, often feared father of modern politics. We want the shortcut to understanding the mechanism of power he was describing.
And we absolutely have to confront that reputation right away. I mean, for centuries, the name Machiavelli has just become synonymous with, well, ruthless manipulation.
Cynical realpolitik, yeah.
We're talking about a man whose influence is consistently linked to politics being completely decoupled from any kind of moral imperative.
That reputation is, I would say, deserved, but it's also incomplete. I mean, for context, by the time you get to Elizabethan England, he was already this legendary figure, the murderous Machiavelli.
The blueprint for villains.
Oh, the absolute blueprint for characters like Shakespeare's Richard III or Iago. And then, fast forward to the 20th century, and scholars are looking at the rise of these totalitarian states.
They're pointing right back at him.
They're often naming him a patron saint of fascism, Nazism, Stalin's Soviet Union.
That is some very heavy company for a civil servant from Florence. And what gives his legacy this terrible weight are those chilling, gut-punching dicta.
Yes.
The phrases that just skip right past any moral niceties and plunge straight into the raw calculation of power.
They're observations of utility, not morality. That's the key. Think about his statements on leadership from the Prince. He says all armed prophets were successful, while unarmed prophets came to ruin.
Which is just a stark warning about relying on moral authority alone.
It is. Or that chillingly pragmatic calculation he makes about material loss.
Oh, this one is brutal.
A man is quicker to forget the death of his father than the loss of his patrimony. I mean, these statements just strip away the veneer of virtue, and they expose the raw, almost transactional mechanics of holding on to power.
And what's so crucial for us to remember is that these foundational works, the source of all this infamy, they weren't written from a position of authority, not from some calm, scholarly study.
No, not at all. They sprang from a moment of profound personal and political catastrophe for him.
Right.
That context is just foundational to understanding the intense, urgent, and pragmatic tone of the writing. Machiavelli's true calling, as he saw it, wasn't philosophy. It was active participation in Florentine politics.
He was a man of action.
A very robust servant of the Republic, starting in 1498. He was handling the incredibly sensitive diplomatic missions, organizing the state militia. He was in the thick of it.
But then the Republic collapsed. The Medici came back in 1512, with Spanish arms backing them.
And just like that, Machiavelli's world ended. He was arrested, briefly tortured because they suspected him of conspiracy, and then he was banished to his little estate outside Florence.
So his entire literary career, the one we actually remember him for, it only began during this forced exile, this fall from grace.
Yes, he was 43 years old, idle, and just desperate to get back into the world of affairs.
So the Prince wasn't some dispassionate academic exercise. It was a tool.
It was a means to an end. A calculated political move aimed squarely at his new masters, the deeply suspicious Medici family.
It's a strategic, maybe even desperate attempt to prove his value to them.
His famous letter from December of 1513, it paints such a vivid picture. He describes spending his days, talking with the ancient authors. He calls them his colloquies with the ancients. Then distilling everything he learned into this little book.
He's basically handing the Medici a job application.
A job application bound in leather, yeah. Detailing the exact skill set you need to rule in chaotic Italy and basically saying, look, I'm the only one who truly understands these rules. You need me.
The ultimate high stakes resume. It makes perfect sense why the tone is so urgent. So let's jump right into the first and most critical job requirement he outlines: military self-sufficiency. Okay, so Machiavelli begins this whole strategic manual by just sweeping away any idealism. The number one non-negotiable condition for a secure state is arms. You must have your own army.
Yes, an army of your own citizens or subjects. And this point is really where he distinguishes himself so sharply from the prevailing wisdom of his time.
How so?
Well, for him, political power is an equation that has to be balanced by military force. He establishes this fundamental principle: an unarmed man is despised.
He says there's no comparison between an armed man and an unarmed one.
Exactly. And if a prince doesn't personally understand military matters, he won't be respected by his soldiers. He can't trust them. So true political self-reliance rests on this physical ability to defend yourself.
And his most devastating critique, the most venomous part of his writing, is reserved for the armies that Italy had become completely dependent on.
Mercenaries and auxiliaries, he just calls them useless and dangerous.
Okay, so what specifically makes them so dangerous? Beyond the obvious risk that they might just switch sides for more money.
Their danger lies in their inherent lack of proper motivation. It's a structural instability. Machiavelli just dissects the psychology of it.
Right.
These mercenary armies are ambitious, they're fickle, they're divided, they have no discipline. Their bravery is reserved only, he says, in the face of friends.
Meaning they prey on the people they're supposed to be protecting.
They prey on the populace, yes, while being cowardly in the face of enemies. And crucially, their only motivation is negligible wages, which are entirely insufficient to make them want to die for you.
So they fight to get paid, not to protect the state or the prince.
Which makes the prince structurally weak. In the long run, he's just paying for his own weakness. In peacetime, he's despoiled by the mercenaries' own greed. In wartime, he's despoiled by his enemies.
And he uses the fate of Italy as his prime example of this.
The definitive historical indictment of the whole system. He maintains that the present ruin of Italy has been brought about by a reliance on mercenary armies over a period of many years. Princes, he says, thought that having these professional soldiers meant they could ignore military duty themselves.
A fatal error.
A fatal error. And this dependence leads to that famous, just jaw-dropping anecdote illustrating Italy's complete lack of valor.
You're talking about King Charles of France.
King Charles VIII, yes. In 1494, he invades Italy to take the Kingdom of Naples. And Machiavelli writes that Charles was able to conquer Italy with a piece of chalk.
The imagery is just stunning.
It is. It means Charles just had to mark his garrisons on a map, march his army in, and the mercenary forces either just dissolved or they defected without a serious fight. Machiavelli says that Italy's problem was a sin, but it was the sin of the princes who relied on foreign arms, not some religious failing.
It was a failure of political and military prudence.
Exactly.
But wait, what if a mercenary general is actually really good? What if they consistently win battles for you? Doesn't that success sort of mitigate the risk?
It creates a double bind, a trap. And Machiavelli analyzes this so rigorously. If a mercenary general is inept, well, he obviously ruins you by losing.
Simple enough.
But if he's excellent, the prince can't rely on him either. And why not? Because an excellent general will inevitably aspire to his own greatness.
He'll want the throne for himself.
Either by trying to seize the principality he serves, or by oppressing others on his own behalf, which, establishes his own separate power base. The prince becomes his prisoner either way. The general needs constant war to feed his army and his ambition, and that is inherently contrary to the prince's need for peace and stability.
So the only true solution, the one that guarantees stability, is the one he always comes back to.
The Roman model.
The Roman model.
Weapons have to be wielded by the prince personally. He uses the model of the Turk, who commanded his own armies, or by a republic's citizens. If a republic deploys a general who isn't valiant, you replace him. If he is valiant, he must be held in check by laws.
So he can't overstep his authority.
Right. The citizen general is expected to go back to his day job when the war is over. It ensures that the military stays subservient to the civilian authority, and the general doesn't become some kind of political kingmaker.
Okay, so if mercenaries are bad, he says auxiliary armies, these are troops loaned by a powerful ally, are somehow even worse.
He calls this the auxiliary trap.
Why is it the ultimate risk?
Because they are structurally the most dangerous. The summoning prince has zero authority over them. Their loyalties are to the one who sent them.
Right.
If auxiliaries lose a battle, you're dissatisfied. But if they win, you become their prisoner. You're completely dependent on the will of the power who loaned them to you.
And he points to Pope Julius II's disastrous choice here.
Absolutely. After his mercenary army failed in his campaign to seize Ferrara, he very ill-advisedly turned to Ferdinand of Spain for help. Machiavelli just criticizes this as a reckless act of desperation. He points out that the Pope, in his eagerness to gain a small territory, basically threw himself into the arms of a much more powerful foreigner.
And the historical precedent he uses to drive this point home is, well, it's genuinely terrifying.
It's the lesson that he thinks Europe should never, ever forget. The Emperor of Constantinople, facing threats from his neighbors, brought 10,000 Ottoman Turks into Greece to help fend them off.
And once the conflict was over,
They never left. Machiavelli writes that this single decision was the beginning of Greece's enslavement to the infidel. He uses the most existential threat facing Christendom at the time Ottoman expansion to demonstrate the absolute folly of relying on external saviors.
when you invite a power stronger than yourself into your home, you forfeit your sovereignty.
That's the lesson.
So if we're summarizing his military doctrine, what should the composition of a successful army actually look like?
The conclusion is firm. It's hierarchical. A mixed army part citizen, part foreign is better than a purely foreign one. But it is, and he's very clear, far inferior to an army made up entirely of one's own citizens.
And he gives an example of this mistake.
He cites King Louis XI of France as an example of just fatal imprudence. Louis disbanded the established French infantry and started hiring Swiss mercenaries. Machiavelli argues this led to continuous dangers for France because Louis undermined the nation's capacity for self-defense.
And it highlights a common failure of human judgment.
Yes, that men relish a dish that appears delicious while it conceals poison within. They prioritize the short-term cost savings or the immediate availability over long-term structural security.
Okay, so we know how a state has to be defended. Now let's look at how new princes actually get power in the first place. Machiavelli gives this incredibly detailed, almost clinical analysis of rising to power.
And he bases it on either fortune or skill. Virtue.
This is the fundamental split for a new ruler.
It is. Those who rise by fortune alone, through money or inheritance or the favor of a grantor, like those rulers Darius created in Greece, they have very little effort acquiring the state. The path to the top is easy.
But once they're there, the trouble starts.
Immediately, because they have no foundation, no deep roots in the populace, no established military strength of their own. They're relying on the goodwill of others, which is, famously fleeting.
But on the other hand, those who rely on skill and their own arms, they have a much harder time acquiring the state.
A great deal of effort, yes, but very little effort to keep it. The initial struggle is what creates the necessary foundation.
The foundation building is done up front.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Machiavelli uses Hiero of Syracuse as his exemplary model for this. He rose from being just a private citizen to become the Prince of Syracuse because the oppressed people saw his talent and elected him their general.
And he immediately proved his skill.
So much so that once he was in power, he realized he couldn't keep the old mercenary army or even the old friends who raised him up. So Hiero eliminated the old army, abandoned old friends for new, and he built his foundation on new soldiers and loyal friends that he chose.
That act of ruthlessly clearing the decks, that's the definition of skill for Machiavelli.
It is, relying solely on your own judgment and your own arms.
And the classic case study he presents for this necessary transition from fortune to skill is Cesare Borgia.
Duke Valentino, yes.
Borgia provides the template for the necessity of calculated, sometimes brutal, action.
Borgia is fascinating because he starts with the maximum amount of fortune. I mean, his father was Pope Alexander VI, who gave him the arms and the territory to start with.
Right, a huge head start.
A huge head start. But Borgia recognized his foundations were unstable. He knew he couldn't depend on the Orsini mercenary army he'd been using or on the shifting alliances of foreign powers like France. So he sets out on this highly calculated series of actions to lay a new, solid foundation based purely on his own power.
And the first obstacle was the chaos he inherited in the Romagna region. It was just rife with disorder.
Every kind of disorder. So he needed instantaneous order, even if it had to be brutal. And to impose it, he installs this man, Ramiro de Lorca, a resolute and ruthless man with complete authority.
And Lorca's mission was simple.
Bring peace and unity, by any means necessary in the shortest time possible. And he succeeds. But in doing so, he attracts immense public hatred because of his severity.
And Borgia understood that hatred is a political liability, but it's also a tool that can be shifted.
Machiavelli calls Borgia's next move highly noteworthy and merits imitation. This is high praise. Borgia judged that Lorqua's excessive authority had served its purpose, but now it risked destabilizing the state through popular resentment.
So to purge their minds and win them over, Borgia distances himself from the cruelty he ordered.
He does. He has Lorqua cut in two and displayed publicly in the main square of Cesena with a block of wood and a bloody knife right next to the body.
That is just a horrifying theatrical act of violence. I mean, doesn't that sort of brutality, even aimed at a hated official, destabilize the state in the long run?
Machiavelli argues the exact opposite here, and this is crucial to his concept of well-used cruelty. The spectacle achieved precisely what Borgia intended. It left the people stunned and appeased.
Stunned by his power and appeased
Because Borgia made it look like all the past cruelty was solely the fault of this minister's abrasive nature, not the prince's will. Borgia demonstrated strength while simultaneously securing the people's goodwill by appearing to avenge their suffering.
And he coupled that theatrical purge with masterful political deception to eliminate his other rivals.
The Orsini and Colonna factions, yes. He used deception brilliantly. The Orsini leaders, after a minor revolt, were looking for reconciliation, but they were suspicious.
And Borgia was a master of dissimulation.
A complete master. He showered Paolo Orsini with every courtesy to reassure him, giving him money, expensive garments, horses, before setting the trap for them at Senigallia, where he had them all murdered.
So by eliminating the rival leaders and turning their followers into his personal allies,
he laid a foundation based on his own armed might and skill. He eliminated the independent power centers that had plagued the Romagna for years.
This analysis of Borgia's actions leads us right to that crucial Machiavellian distinction: when cruelty is appropriate and when it is disastrous, and it all depends on its management and timing.
This is the idea of well-used cruelty, which he discusses with a very clinical detachment. Cruelty is well-used if it's executed at a single stroke, out of the necessity to secure one's power, and then it's immediately stopped.
And importantly, the cruelty has to be converted into some kind of benefit for the subjects.
Yes, the greatest possible benefit. It's a means to achieve stability quickly, not a lifestyle.
And the opposite, the badly used cruelty.
That's the one that increases with time rather than subsiding. The prince who uses cruelty continuously, who has to rely on perpetual fear to maintain order, he cannot possibly survive. He just creates endless resentment and insecurity.
He uses Agathocles of Syracuse to illustrate the man who successfully used this initial necessary cruelty, but who, despite all his success, could not achieve glory. Why is that distinction, power versus glory, so important to him?
Agathocles was monstrous. He betrayed his friends, committed endless perfidies, slaughtered his fellow citizens to seize power, but he survived, long and securely, because he consolidated his power quickly.
And Machiavelli's nuance here is essential.
It is. These means can lead you to power, but not glory. Glory, for Machiavelli, is that lasting historical esteem that comes from establishing durable, virtuous political institutions, like the Roman Republic, that benefit future generations. Agathocles built a tyranny that secured him power, but it provided no lasting legacy of institutional excellence.
He was a survivor, not a founder.
An excellent way to put it.
So if Borgia did everything right, well-used cruelty, force, deception, skill, what ultimately caused his ruin?
He was ruined by the limits of human control. Despite all his genius, his foundation was undone by two things: the brevity of his father, Pope Alexander VI's life, and his own severe illness right when his father died.
Bad timing.
Horrible timing. Had Alexander lived longer, or had Borgia been well, he would have controlled the subsequent papal election. He was literally just a few months away from consolidating enough force to depend only on his own power.
But he did make one single fatal political error.
His one strategic error lay in that papal election. He allowed Giuliano della Rovere, who became Pope Julius II, to become the next pope.
And this was someone Borgia had harmed in the past.
Yes. Julius had every reason to fear him and to hate the Borgia family. And Borgia made the mistake of believing the lie that great advancement and new benefits make men forget old injuries.
Machiavelli sees this as a fundamental psychological mistake.
A fundamental mistake. Men will always attack you out of either fear or hatred, and Borgia provided Julius with both the opportunity and the motive. He fundamentally misjudged the depth of human resentment.
And this emphasis on achieving success, regardless of the means, leads us directly to Machiavelli's most infamous and discussed assertion: the necessity of deception.
He is stunningly blunt about it. A wise prince will not keep his word when keeping it turns against him. And when necessary, he should deceive the populace.
And his justification for this?
He justifies this by stating that the world is primarily made up of common people who are convinced by two things: appearances and by the end result.
So if you win, the methods don't matter.
If the majority can point to the prince's ultimate success order, security, victory, the few dissenters who see beyond the appearances and detect the deception do not count.
When we talk about deception and breaking oaths, Machiavelli points to the ultimate master strategist of the era,
Pope Alexander VI.
his own father.
Well, Caesar's father. Machiavelli was an eyewitness to Alexander's reign, and he just marvels at it. He notes that Alexander never thought or did anything except to deceive, and he always found someone to deceive.
He never kept his promises or oaths.
Never. But he always got away with his deceptions because he understood the populace's short memory and their reliance on appearances. Machiavelli's terrible conclusion is that the prince must acquire and keep his principality, and if he succeeds, the means, however morally questionable, will always be praised and judged honorable by all.
So far, we focused on princes who take power through force and cunning. But if the new principality is acquired not by force, but through the favor of the citizens, what he calls a civil principality, the path to long-term stability requires a different but equally rigorous calculation.
Yes, and this calculation is focused entirely on popular support.
So Machiavelli steps back here to identify this foundational political dynamic that he sees in every single city.
He calls it the two opposing humors.
Right. The nobles, or the great, want to command and oppress the people.
While the people do not want to be commanded or oppressed by the nobles. And this conflict, this inherent class struggle, it inevitably drives political life toward one of three outcomes: principality, liberty, which is a republic, or anarchy.
And for a private citizen who wants to become prince, choosing the right patron, either the people or the nobles, is the decision that determines his stability.
And Machiavelli is uncompromising here. The prince must keep the people on his side.
They're the safer bet.
They are the safer bet and the easier constituency to satisfy. The people are content if the prince simply delivers on their one basic request, which is that he not oppress them.
Simple enough.
The prince, by contrast, can survive without hostile noblemen. They're few, and they can be made and unmade at will. You can strip them of their power and influence.
And you can't do that with the populace.
No, a prince must fear a hostile populace because they are numerous. They will abandon him instantly in adverse times, and they can make his life impossible through passive resistance or even outright revolt.
This means that even if a prince gets power through the nobility against the will of the people, which he says is the harder path, his immediate #1 priority has to be winning over the populace.
And he stresses that this is absolutely achievable and often results in an even stronger bond. Machiavelli observes that when men encounter benevolence where they expected harm, show greater gratitude to their benefactor.
So the populace, which expected oppression from a prince raised by the nobles, is overjoyed when he shows kindness and protection.
Exactly. A prince must have the people on his side, or he will inevitably be destroyed when external adversity strikes. It doesn't matter how many fortresses or alliances he has.
This reliance on popular goodwill leads us to one of the prince's most critical defense mechanisms: protection against conspiracy, which historically was the downfall of so many tyrants.
This is one of the strongest remedies against assassination. The prince's ultimate security rests heavily on one thing: not to be hated by the masses.
And why is that so effective?
Well, Machiavelli argues that conspirators face infinite difficulties: the risk of discovery, betrayal by a friend, fear of failure, lack of arms. But crucially, conspirators are only certain to succeed if they believe they will satisfy the populace by killing the prince.
But if they think the murder will enrage the populace,
They will lack the courage to act, because they know they face certain immediate death afterwards at the hands of the mob.
we see the raw power of that popular goodwill in the famous example of the Bentivoglio family in Bologna.
It's a powerful story of political sociology. Annibale Bentivoglio, the Prince of Bologna, was killed by conspirators, the Caneschi, leaving only his infant son Giovanni.
And the people's goodwill toward the Bentivoglio house was so intense.
That immediately after the murder, the people rose up and killed all the Caneschi. But the devotion didn't stop there. They realized they had no immediate heir.
So what did they do?
They went to Florence, found a man they thought was a Bentivoglio heir, who was actually the supposed son of a blacksmith, and they offered him the government of Bologna until the true heir, Giovanni, came of age.
That's incredible.
This irrational, visceral, popular loyalty demonstrates that a prince doesn't need to worry unduly about conspiracies if the people are well disposed toward him.
He also gives some very pragmatic advice on how a prince should handle a conspiracy once it's been uncovered. You can't just move immediately.
No, extreme caution is necessary. If the prince finds out the conspiracy is extensive and strong, he has to act as if he knows nothing until he's mustered enough force to crush it entirely and safely.
Because if he exposes the plot, while the conspirators still have a network,
Necessity will force them to act immediately, bringing about the prince's own ruin. He cites the Duke of Athens in Florence, who was killed because he exposed a plot before he had the power to execute the conspirators. The lesson is simple. Never reveal weakness or fear to a determined enemy.
moving from the Italian city-states, Machiavelli then looks back to the Roman Empire to provide a more complex case study of power consolidation, where the prince faced this unique, multi-layered balancing act.
Right. The Roman emperors faced all the standard problems, dealing with the ambitions of the nobles and the hostility of the populace, but they had a third, more difficult and often fatal problem.
The army.
The structural corruption and sheer physical danger posed by their own armies, particularly the Praetorian Guard. It was almost impossible to satisfy both the army and the populace at the same time.
And what were these two factions demanding?
Diametrically opposed outcomes. The populace wanted peace and hence a modest prince, a ruler who would ensure stability, low taxes, order.
And the army.
The army wanted the opposite, a prince with a military spirit who was arrogant, cruel, and rapacious. And why? Because they wanted violence, war, and civil disorder so they could double their pay and be given free rein to unleash their greed on the populace. The army was a corrupt, self-serving power center.
And this fundamental opposition ruined many good and humane emperors.
The examples of failure are stark. Pertinax, who succeeded a corrupt predecessor, was killed because the soldiers could not bear the honest way of life he tried to impose. They wanted license.
Right.
Alexander Severus, a modest and kind ruler, was killed for being considered effeminate and allowing his mother to govern him. They inspired contempt because they failed to satisfy the corrupt, violent expectations of their indispensable power base, the army.
Even Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius, who was successful, only survived because he came to the throne by inheritance and he possessed such enormous personal skill that he was respected by both soldiers and people. He was the exception.
So the successful emperors were the ruthless ones who chose to satisfy the army, like Septimius Severus.
Severus is presented as the master strategist of this terrible balancing act. He understood the necessity of satisfying the army, even if it meant oppressing the populace. He was so formidable that the army remained satisfied and reverent, and the populace was simultaneously awestruck and stupefied by his power.
He kept both groups in check through fear and satisfaction.
And Machiavelli praises Severus for brilliantly employing the necessary traits of both the fox and the lion.
A fox and the lion.
He was the fox when he systematically eliminated his rivals. He deceived Albinus with the title of Caesar while preparing to attack Niger, buying himself time. He was the lion by being this formidable, terrifying military man, always keeping the army satisfied with double pay and maintaining an absolutely fearsome reputation.
So his conclusion is that a new prince facing a similar corrupt power base can't imitate the humane Marcus.
He has to take from Severus the necessary attributes to found a new state. If the powerful faction you need to rule is corrupt, whether it's the army or the nobility, it's to your advantage to satisfy them. And in that case, he says, good deeds are your enemy.
We've spent a lot of time detailing the necessary evils and strategic maneuvers for a single powerful prince to seize and hold power. But Machiavelli wasn't just the author of The Prince.
No, he was also the author of the Discourses on Livy, where he expresses his deep admiration for the Roman Republic.
And this is where his political philosophy gets incredibly complex, paradoxical even.
It is where his true genius as a political scientist shines through. Machiavelli notes this strange hypocrisy in his contemporaries. He observes that while ancient Roman laws and medicine are constantly imitated, their political actions, organizing a state, maintaining a state, waging war, are admired but avoided in every way.
As if human nature itself has fundamentally changed.
Yes, he writes with this amazement and sadness at this profound abandonment of ancient political skill. He's suggesting that people don't want to do the hard, practical work required to found a lasting government.
And when Machiavelli sees Rome as achieving perfection, but not through a single brilliant act of genius, it was achieved through a dynamic, almost accidental political process.
That is Rome's great fortune, and its great difference from a place like Sparta, which had a single, all-wise founder like Lycurgus. Rome combined the three pure forms of government,
You have the principality, the aristocracy, and the democracy.
represented by the consuls, the Senate, and the tribunes of the plebeians. And critically, this blended, mixed system wasn't planned. It was achieved by chance, arising directly from the relentless, messy discord between the plebeians and the Senate that forced concessions and eventually created a durable and perfect republic.
This leads to his most radical and counterintuitive argument for liberty, the goodness of tumult and discord.
This is a genuine paradigm shift in political theory. Most philosophers of the time condemned civil strife. Machiavelli argues that those who censure the constant discord between the nobles and the plebeians in Rome are blaming the very things that played a foremost part in keeping Rome free.
So all the laws that favored liberty.
He insists they arose directly from this political conflict and the resulting tumult and shouts of disorder.
That sounds like a recipe for civil war. How could a state function with constant tumult?
Well, Machiavelli clarifies that these clashes, over 300 years, rarely resulted in bloodshed or exile. They were noisy, they were disruptive, and they forced the government to respond to grievances. This political energy was channeled into productive institutional change.
It showed the republic was fundamentally sound.
Exactly. The people had institutional mechanisms, the tribunes, to vent their anger without resorting to violence.
But other republics, like Sparta and Venice, lasted a long time by placing the protection of liberty in the hands of the nobility and avoiding internal conflict. Why didn't he just recommend that model?
This is the crucial distinction, and it goes right to the heart of a republic's ultimate purpose. Sparta and Venice achieved long-term freedom by deliberately choosing a path of stasis.
They didn't want to expand.
They sought not to expand their dominion and power. Their quiet, stable structures were perfectly suited for maintenance. They placed the custody of liberty in the hands of the nobles, ensuring the nobles maintained the system.
And Rome's aim was always the opposite.
Always expansion. Machiavelli argues that a republic seeking to expand must follow the model of Rome and allow tumult and popular discord to the extent that it can.
And why is that?
Because expansion requires great numbers of well-armed men. If you restrict political participation in armaments to a small noble class, like Sparta did, you can't wage large-scale foreign wars effectively. Rome needed the energy, the numbers, and the motivation of the populace to fuel its military conquests.
So for a small state like Sparta or Venice, expansion is poison.
It leads to ruin because their foundations are too weak for large acquisitions. Rome had to accept the internal conflict to achieve external greatness.
So the tumult was the engine that built the most powerful state in history. That's a powerful idea. He also directly challenges a very common anti-democratic proverb that you still hear today.
The old political axiom that he who builds upon the masses builds upon sand. Machiavelli disagrees strongly. He argues that proverb only holds true when a private citizen is trying to bypass the law to build a foundation on the populace's temporary, fickle support.
But when the populace is part of a constitutional structure,
They are the most stable foundation available.
and when we compare the governance of an unbound populace versus an unbound prince, which one does he think is wiser and more stable?
Machiavelli contends that the populace is wiser and more constant than the prince. He argues that the populace, even when given license, will more or less keep to the laws by which it lives because the collective mind is naturally more conservative and less subject to erratic singular passions.
Whereas a single prince, if he's unchecked by laws,
He'll be more ungrateful, unstable, and infinitely more imprudent, driven by personal greed or whim.
that's a strong claim, given the historical terror of mob rule.
He synthesizes it by comparing the cure required for their respective disorders. If a populace makes mistakes, they can be cured by words and reasoned argument.
But to cure a prince's disorder,
His instability, his cruelty, his greed, that often requires the blade of a knife, meaning execution or revolution. Since one requires a more incisive cure, it follows that the unbound prince creates greater, more serious ills than the unbound populace. The people's errors are fewer, less serious, and easier to resolve. It's a compelling defense of collective wisdom under law.
Machiavelli, the master strategist, he knew that no amount of skill or foresight could completely overcome the unexpected forces of the world. So he dedicates a major section of his work to the capricious role of fortune.
The ancient goddess of chance, yes. He views fortune as the arbiter of half our actions, but critically, she leaves the other half, or almost the other half, to our free will.
And he famously compares fortune to a violent torrent.
A torrent that floods the plains, destroying everything in its path, hurling earth and houses from one place to another. Everyone flees its force without being able to stand up to it.
Which sounds a bit like fatalism, but the purpose of the metaphor is actually to advocate for human prudence and preparation.
Exactly. The torrent is unstoppable when it hits, but man is not helpless. The solution is preparedness. In times of calm, man must prepare himself with dikes and dams so that when the torrent of fortune rises, its force will be channeled and contained, mitigating the damage.
And the tragedy of his contemporary Italy, in his eyes, was that it was a field without dikes or dams.
Exactly. Germany, Spain, and France, by contrast, had prepared themselves with appropriate skill and foresight. They had established the stable institutions and self-reliant armies he advocated for.
But preparing the defenses is only half the battle. The other half is knowing when to change your methods, what he calls adapting to the times.
Success depends entirely on whether a prince's course of action conforms to the quality of the times. If the times call for caution, the cautious man succeeds. If the times call for impetuosity, the impetuous man succeeds.
And people approach goals in different ways, cautiously, recklessly, with force or with guile.
The deep difficulty, however, is what he calls the inflexibility of nature. Man cannot deviate from that to which nature inclines him.
That's a profound psychological observation. If a cautious man has always prospered by being cautious, his entire identity and his instincts are built on that path, so he's unable to act impetuously when circumstances suddenly demand it.
It's his greatest strength turning into his fatal weakness. The moment the wheel of fortune turns and demands audacity, his rigid adherence to his proven cautious path leads directly to his ruin. He won't be able to adapt even if he knows intellectually that he should, because his nature is fixed.
And Machiavelli says this difficulty, this inability of men to adapt their nature to changing circumstances, is precisely why fortune seems to control men, keeping them under her yoke.
It is.
And yet when we look at his conclusion on which approach is generally better, he sides dramatically with action over caution. He injects this almost personal, visceral energy into the philosophy.
He concludes with that famous, audacious line that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, because fortune is a woman, and if you wish to dominate her, you must beat and batter her.
It's an incredibly charged metaphor.
It is, and it's designed to shock the reader into abandoning their psychological comfort and taking swift, decisive action. He asserts that she is more partial to young men who are wilder and command her with greater audacity, rather than those cautious men who treat her with reverence. Audacity, in Machiavelli's world, is often its own political virtue.
And this call for impetuous action leads directly to the ultimate, highly dramatic conclusion of The Prince,
The exhortation.
the exhortation.
It's Machiavelli's passionate call for a savior, a new prince, to emerge and adopt the government he has just detailed. He asks if the time is ripe for Italy to greet this new leader, and he argues that all conditions are favorable for a new Moses or a Cyrus to demonstrate their skill.
Because Italy is in ruins.
It's enslaved, beaten, plundered, flayed, overrun, exposed to all manner of adversity. The country is so ruined, so lacking in dikes and dams, that it presents a clean slate for true greatness. The misery itself is the necessary condition for valor to emerge and seize the moment.
What an incredible contrast in political thought. We have thoroughly explored the two faces of Machiavelli, the pragmatic politician and the prince, who detailed the necessary evils like well-used cruelty and calculated deception required to seize a state.
And then Machiavelli, the Republican theorist in the Discourses, who praised the discord between the nobles and the plebeians as the very engine of Roman liberty, and who found the populace wiser and more constant than the unbound prince.
The synthesis isn't a contradiction, though. It feels more like a comprehensive blueprint.
I think so. He provides the tools for dynamic governance, recognizing that the ruthless skill required to create a state is often different from the collective wisdom required to conserve it over centuries.
So, if we take this 16th century roadmap and apply it to our contemporary world, what are the three enduring lessons for you, the learner, today?
I think first, political or corporate viability always rests on self-reliance, on your own arms. Reliance on proxies, outsourced functions, temporary alliances, the modern mercenary consultant or foreign power is fundamentally ruinous and dangerous when fortune turns. You have to possess the core capability yourself.
Second, Power is maintained not primarily by fortresses or complex alliances with the powerful few, but by managing popular opinion. The prince must ensure he is not to be hated by the masses. You can remake the nobility, you can fire the generals, and you can ignore the powerful. But you cannot survive without the populace's grudging acceptance or active goodwill. That defense is always stronger than any physical defense.
And the third, and perhaps the most difficult lesson because it speaks to our personal psychological failings. Success demands radical adaptability. We are slaves to our nature, which inclines us toward caution or impetuosity. But to escape fortune's yoke, we have to recognize that the prudence that made us successful in one environment may be the very thing that leads to our ruin in the next.
To achieve greatness, you must sometimes be the impetuous, audacious agent of change, willing to abandon the methods that define you.
Precisely.
Here's our final provocative thought for you to take away. Machiavelli believed that modern Europe had lost the skill and valor of the ancients because their political systems had become soft. He felt Christianity, by prioritizing suffering and patience, made men less terrified of defeat. It made them focus on enduring rather than avenging failure.
A profound critique.
So if our modern world, much like Machiavelli's 16th century Italy, is facing unexpected upheavals, relying on models of relentless forward progress that are failing, should we be looking for the political dikes and dams, the constitutional restraints and citizen armies of the ancients? Or does the modern torrent require a new, utterly ruthless kind of impetuosity that only those willing to beat and batter fortune can provide?
That is the essential and uncomfortable choice Machiavelli forces us to confront, regardless of the age we live in. We hope this deep dive has given you plenty of strategic ammunition to consider.